I am Skip Williams, and I'm the president of the Bellingham City Club. Up or sound. And so I got to hold two microphones today. This one is for the video camera, and this is for you. Anyway, I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting. And as most of you know, and I'm sure there's some non-members here in the room, but City Club is a nonpartisan. City Club provides a nonpartisan forum to discuss issues of interest and impact to the greater Bellingham and Whatcom County community. And our focus of our program can be totally local, regional, national in scope, and but our purpose is to enlighten and have a thoughtful discussion about some of these issues. So, that being said, if you're not currently a member of the Bellingham City Club, you can grab one of the blue membership forms. It looks like this. Right out there at the membership table, fill one out. The dues are $35 a year, and and your dues provides us the funding to put on these wonderful programs. Right now, our membership level is over 350, and I've been told that's the largest membership group in the county. So that's pretty good. And to tell you how far back I go, I remember when our membership was like at 80. So anyway, I would like to take just a minute to talk about our future programs for the next 3 months. Next month, we're going to explore the proposed new Whatcom County Jail, which I'm sure you've all heard about, and the Sheriff's Office complex, which is proposed to be located just west of the city, out by Bellingham International Airport. This issue is rife with a lot of different sub-issues, and just to give you one that has surfaced, the current average daily population in our jail now is approximately 420 inmates. The proposed new jail complex would house around 2,450. So, as you can see, this is quite a hot topic in Whatcom County. Our guests for that program will be Whatcom County Sheriff Bill Elfo and my friend Barbara Sternberger of the citizens group Right Size Jail Committee. So that will be a very interesting program next month, and I hope you can all make it. Our March program will consist of one speaker, Congressman Rick Larson, who will share his perspective on the current Congress and speak to the issues that he thinks are important for our congressional district. At that meeting, we will provide ample time for questions from you, the audience. And for our April program, we hope to have a panel to discuss the possible industrial development of the Cherry Point Deepwater Port for transshipment of goods or commodities to the Far East. So, that one isn't solid yet, but stay tuned. Jump on our website as details about that develop. Now, before I introduce our moderator for today's program, I have to tell you that this is, being a baby boomer, all this technology, although I'm technologically plugged in. I mean, I go on Facebook about once every 2 weeks. I've got an iPad and an iPod and a smartphone and everything else. But this Skype thing I haven't figured out yet. But anyway, this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful program. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Jennings, who's a member of our program committee, who will introduce things. Okay, here is Liz.
Thanks, Skip. So this is an unusual program for us here at City Club. Number one, the topic is new for us. We haven't talked about generational change here at City Club in recent memory, at least. It's also new for us because we have the fabulous opportunity to test some new technology today. Our guest speaker today is Kei Kawashima-Ginsberg from Tufts University. And yesterday morning, she battled through the snow to get to the airport, and her flight was canceled. Kei is still in Boston. We're in Bellingham. We're going with Plan B, which is we are going to engage with Kei via Skype. We are going to watch a PowerPoint presentation from her desktop. And to add to that mix, we're trying to record it on video. And so there's many things moving, many moving parts. We ask for your patience because we might have to actually talk through a couple of the transitions. But somehow it seems a little bit appropriate for this topic. So thank you for being flexible and engaging in an experiment with us. I want to say thank you to the Western Washington University Center for Service Learning, Alex Aline and Tim Costello, who are here from the staff, and Masai Ford, who's one of our speakers today. This program really developed in conversation with the Center for Service Learning's Advisory Committee. We were talking as a group, and I had recently heard some, how shall I put it, stereotypes about what we call the Millennials, or Generation Y. And I'd been considering these stereotypes against my own experience, and the two things didn't match up, and we started talking about that as a group, that there are stereotypes of Generation Y, the Millennials, folks who are 18 to 30-ish right now, that it's a disengaged group, that young people today are just not involved in our communities like they used to be. In the context of my work with nonprofits and fundraising, I heard a tone of panic in someone's voice as they described how this up-and-coming generation doesn't care and doesn't give. Now, being on the Center for Service Learning Advisory Committee, obviously we had a much different experience. We have been, yes, Rich, I was talking about you. Our experience was that we're surrounded by young people who care deeply about their communities and the world, and that they are engaging in some creative ways that we never would have thought of, but they do engage differently. And so we were curious about this, and I was so excited to see the research that the Pew Center on Research put out on generational change. And if you haven't gone to that link that we provided in the publicity, do. There's a wonderful report there. Find yourself. Are you like me, Generation X, firmly in the middle of that generation? Perhaps you identify as a baby boomer. I learned something I didn't know before. My mother's from what they call, these demographers call, the silent generation. She was born in 1943, and my father is from the greatest generation, and we know those were folks born before 1928. These are the groups demographers have kind of grouped us all into, and Pew has done some wonderful research on this, and Kei and her colleagues at Circle, and I'll give you the full title of that in a moment, have done some additional research, so we're really happy to have her here today. This is the point where I do a little move to the left and we start playing with technology. But actually, Kei is here with us already. She's on Skype and may be listening in on us. So I'm going to move on over and we'll get into the program. Rich just instructed me not to go too far left. So, as the lead researcher at Circle, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, Kei Kawashima-Ginsberg conducts research, creates reports and tools, and provides assistance to other organizations on civic and political engagement across the United States. She has a PhD in clinical psychology from Loyola University, Chicago. Her research focuses on positive youth development, particularly civic identity development among minority, immigrant, and underserved youth. Circle's reports and products can be accessed at civicyouth.org. We're also really excited to have with us today two young leaders from our community. To the furthest, your right, my left, is Javier Flores, who is 28. We've got bookends on this generation with us today. Javier, I enjoyed working with at the Coalition for Healthy Communities here in Bellingham. He worked for 6 years in Fresno County government and wrote his master's thesis in public administration on generational change in the workplace. So he knows a little bit about this topic. He's passionate about national and community service, and he serves as an AmeriCorps Vista in Bellingham. This is his second year and is currently working at the Opportunity Council to research poverty and community needs. We also have with us Masai Ford, and our call was dropped again. This will be fun. And Masai is 18, and he has been involved in leadership and service as Eco-Rep Captain for his residence hall at Western. He's a National Residence Hall honorary, and as he's helping to admit new and diverse students mentor. Masai works as a program assistant in the Western Washington Center for Service Learning. How many people here took that little online quiz, How Millennial Were You? Who was surprised at the results? Anybody care to share? Let's just get one experience. Yes, Richard.
2.
We have a 2. I think my father called himself a Civil War beatnik, and that would put you in that era, right about there. Was anybody more millennial than you thought? Yeah?
I was 46. I don't know how that happened.
It must be all those tattoos and piercings. Yeah? Okay. Well, I was surprised. I had an 86, and I think it has to do with the fact that I sleep with my cell phone, and I do have a couple of markings on my body somewhere. So we do have Kei here now. Would you like to just introduce yourself and your work to us a little bit, and then we can move into the slides?
That's great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on behalf of Circle. It's really exciting for us. We're a research organization that focuses on young people, anywhere between the ages of 16 to about 30-year-old, so right into the millennial generation as of now. And in terms of how they engage in community and civic life in their community, also nationally. We do research, but we also work with a lot of practitioner organizations like Get Out the Vote organization and other youth development organizations. And from what I understand, you guys, the audience today, have a lot of civic leaders in the community, so I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and have a great discussion later on. So thank you.
Thank you.
So should we move into my presentation, and then hopefully be short, and we can move into having a discussion after that?
Sounds great.
Okay, so let me switch over to a full screen presentation here. Just bear with me for a second. So I'm going to start by just defining who this generation is in terms of the size and who they are, where they were born. So these are the people that are generally born in 1982. So we just talked about how the millennials are a large generation, and the research covers really young adults between age 18 to 29 in research. So why should you as civic leaders care about the millennials? First of all, they are this really large cohort that's practically replacing the retiring boomers. They're coming into the workforce as they're retiring. So that's going to mean that there's going to be significant changes in American politics and civic and community life, and also the way the workforce looks, feels, and functions are going to be different. Because they are so different from the older generations, at least in some aspects, there's going to be a need to capture their assets and see the differences as just differences rather than judging them and accept them, so that you can sort of work with them really effectively. Lastly, this particular generation is really an optimistic and hopeful one, and it's really an asset for the civic perspective, because they believe in change and making this world and the community a better place. We saw that the most during the 2008 election when Obama campaign really effectively called upon their service. And they really responded by volunteering for the campaign and turning out in a larger number than they had ever done in recent elections. Let's talk a little bit about the demography. In short, the millennials are the diverse generation, most diverse than ever, and they're delaying transition into full adulthood. You can see here, they're more ethnically diverse than the older generations have ever been. Only about 70%, about 60% of young people today consider themselves non-Hispanic youth. And right about a quarter of them are considered immigrant youth. 16% of them were born outside of the United States, and the rest have at least one parent who were born outside. They're marrying later and later and having children later and later. You can see sort of a steady delay in marriage here. And more relevant today is that they're struggling to enter the workforce fully. A whole lot of them are unemployed. Right now, the unemployment rate among youth is about 19%, and it's even much worse for the minority youth. For Black youth, it's 33%, and for Hispanic and Asian youth, it's about 22%. So it's a really hard time for them to get into the workforce, and it's really not getting much better in the recent recovery period either. 61% of them do believe the generation is unique. This is quite a bit more than what Gen Xers believe. 49% of Gen Xers believe they're unique. They by themselves by a few things here: technology use, as you can imagine, music and pop culture that they're familiar with, and liberal and tolerant ideology. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things here, both technology use and liberal tolerant, and what they're like in those domains specifically. So we say that the millennials are tech savvy. We've always said that, and we mostly say that because in general, they just sort of get used to new technology as soon as they come out, and they use it like they've always known about it, and we're just appalled by that. Now, the research shows that they're a little bit more than just tech savvy in that they show a lot greater levels of trust in what technology can do for them. They believe that the technology, especially new ones, make life easier and better. They even believe that they make people and family become closer. They also seem to really invite this, what I might call multitasking in both good and bad ways. Some of my favorite findings are things like, about 20% of them believe that it's okay to check and read and write messages during meals and during meetings. 60% of them have texted while driving. And one thing, 11% of them have at least once read a text while having sex. So those are really different ideas about what technology can and should do among millennials. And that's something that, I'm a Gen Xer, and not something that I would be able to do physically, and probably wouldn't imagine doing. So that's it's another one. The young people use the most common, about 75% of them, as you may saw in the millennial quiz, have a profile, and a huge percent of them have online access in and out of home. So they have a lot of Wi-Fi access, they can use internet on the phone and their smartphone and iPads and so on. They don't just use social networking in different locations and in modality, but also they use it for different purposes than older generations might. The Gen Xers and above might check on your friends, check on your kids, just stalk your college roommate and see what they're doing today. Those are typical use for us. The young people today seem to use it for a lot more than that, like actually connecting and finding jobs for different reasons, or even organizing different civic activities, like organizing demonstrations, putting together and completing petitions and collecting enough signatures. And a lot of the youth organizations that we know today actually host an event over on Facebook, where they're using both Facebook and tweets in a way, again, that's somewhat new. They would do things like they might be on the hills doing some sort of campaign or lobbying as a youth organization with some of their youth leaders, but all the while, all the hundreds of other young people are tweeting in their opinions and questions as the event goes on. And that event and the comments gets relayed to the political leaders and policymakers live. That's a completely different ways of participation, and that's only really possible using social networking. So that's somewhat new. So again, there are some questions about the millennial social value in the millennial quiz, and as you probably imagine, millennials are more progressive than older generations. That's not really special in itself, in that the younger generation have always held more liberal belief system than the older generation. They are, though, unique in some aspects, even compared to the older generations when they were young. So they are more tolerant of alternative lifestyles and diverse backgrounds, like gay marriage or gay couples raising children, women working outside of home with small children, and interracial marriage, and so on. They are relatively intolerant of single mothers having children, and that's interesting given they were most likely generation to have grown up with single mothers themselves. So that might be based on their own experience and perhaps challenges that were involved in growing up in a single parent household. They are more egalitarian, and they're less religious. 26% of them have no religious affiliation, and that's more than older generations when they were young. Most likely, there are about 10 to 16% of them that had no affiliation when they were young. However, there is still a religious war among the millennials. About 45% of them say that they pray daily. So that hasn't changed much. Another one is that they're more distrustful of major institutions like government and major companies, things like that. There has been a little bit of a shift according to a recent research where the millennials are actually much more closer to the older generation than the older generations were when they were young. They're actually not that different in terms of the levels of trust when we include the younger millennials in this aspect. Finally, they might be shifting a little bit toward conservatism. One thing that we saw more concretely is the midterm election results, where the young people shifted far more toward GOP party than they did in 2008 election, although they were still predominantly liberal. Other things that we're seeing are things like drop in support of affirmative action and support for large government taking care of the needy, things like that. That's actually going down for them, and that's an interesting shift, and we have to watch what's going to happen there. Overall, what I'm saying here is that although they are more progressive than older generation, first of all, they seem to be more similar than we might have thought in the past, and also they may be shifting toward conservatism. Now, what are they like in politics and political behavior? The graph here shows that the millennials' turnout has been really rising. So the millennials have been really generally able to vote since about 2000, and you can see an upward trend between 2000 and 2008. And this is pretty significant because the last election hit, I think, the third highest turnout among young people, and that's highest since 1992 election here. Now, I'd love to say that it's just because they're millennials and they like to vote. It's probably not exactly true. There were a lot of investment in the youth voting world since we saw this horrible result in 1996 and 2000, when we felt that the young people just weren't interested in voting. And the gap between the young people and older people in voting really expanded then. So there's been a lot of investment. And Circle is actually one of those investments. We were created so that we can disseminate the research findings and importance of voting in non-partisanship sort of way through Pew Charitable Trust, and that's how we were founded. And that, along with things like Rock the Vote and TV's massive media campaign, may have contributed to the rise in voter turnout. They preferred Obama really strongly in 2008. You can see the merging was 2-1 here. That's a lot more different than the older generation. They continued to really like Obama even in 2010. They were least likely to blame Barack Obama for the current economic downturn here. You can see sort of a nice age curve. Like I said earlier, there's a slight shift toward GOP since 2008 election. I'm pointing to this curve right here. In 2008, they were far less likely to vote for the Republican candidate in House election, and now they're a little bit more likely to do that. But if you can see sort of a long-term trend, they were traditionally complete half and half split. We were just seeing sort of huge rise in Democratic Party support over time. And then this sort of a maybe strengthening of conservative party and voting behavior is somewhat of a new trend. And we have to really watch what's going to happen in 2012. Their service and community participation activities, in short, is that they don't participate as much, but the trend isn't really different from when older generations were young. About 5% of them attend meetings or work with neighbors to solve problems. About 20% of them participate in volunteering activities. And about 30% of them donate money to a community organization or political campaign. You can see the difference is quite large between young and old. Long term though, the volunteering is up. I don't know if you can see this. There's sort of a trend line peak going up from 1975 to 2005. That's the volunteering among young people, indicating they are generally more likely to volunteer than when other generations were young. However, their levels of community participation has been flat. They are also behind in other aspects of civic behaviors, with few exceptions. They're less likely to have group membership, they're less likely to take leadership, attend meetings, or engage in any type of political act other than voting. These are things like boycotting, calling up city officials to ask a question, participating in march and demonstration. They are almost as likely to discuss politics and current events with friends and family, and they're actually more likely to check out the news from the internet at least a few times a week. They are, however, less likely to also read the newspaper, listen to radio, or watch national television for news. So it's not that they get more news, but it's more likely they count on the internet. One thing I really want to draw your attention here is the lack of group leadership among millennials. This means just that only 5% of millennials are taking positions like board member or a committee or leading a nonprofit in the community. And that has some implications that such a small portion of young people are taking leadership in the community here. So although I just said the millennials aren't quite as likely to participate in civic and political behaviors, it doesn't seem as though they're not willing to contribute or participate. You can see that in some of the anecdotal episodes, like there's a huge surge in social entrepreneurship by millennials. This really seemed to suit really well or fit well with what millennials are about in some ways. You know, social entrepreneurship is all about this great idea that's your own, that's creative, that you can make happen rather quickly in some ways. And they really leverage the ability that they have with the technology by having this great idea, calling out to their friends and acquaintances through social networking and having some action happen pretty quickly. And in sometimes a really significant way. We've seen that in so many examples. And volunteering rate among millennials are slightly up, like I said earlier. And when opportunities came in 2008 election, they did respond. We also know from a lot of evidence and anecdotes, really, that online activism is really common. We, from the research side, though, is having a lot of hard time capturing that because, for one, it's really changing really fast what you can do online in terms of civic activism. And secondly, we can't quite decide what to call an action, right? Is it enough to push a button and say, yes, I like this issue on Facebook, or do you have to do a lot more than that? So there's been sort of our fault, perhaps, but we can't quite keep up with them. They move so quickly. So this is sort of an overview or landscape of what millennials are like and what their civic behavior is like. And I think Liz can send you all or make public much more extensive slide set with a lot of graphs of more information here. But for the sake of time, I'm gonna sort of go on the summary form. One of the things that I want to sort of again call your attention to about the millennials, though, is that it is a diverse group, and diversity comes with disparity in some ways. And almost half of the young people today don't attend college, at least until they're about 30, and we don't think they're going to attend college at that point, really. It's not likely. And they suffer a lot of, in some ways, barriers and challenges when it comes to civic engagement. So I want to talk about them for a few minutes, and then we can talk about implications of all that. So the non-college youth for us really is defined by anybody that's 18 to 29-year-old that have never acquired any post-secondary education. By that definition, 42% of these young people are non-college youth. It's actually a large proportion. There's an income disparity, and also immigrants are less likely to attend college. Also, about half the people that are considered non-college youth are people of color, so it's overrepresented by the people of color here. So that's the demographics. And what happens now is that if you're non-college youth, you're likely to be poor, you're likely to be minority, you are also more likely to be of immigrant origin. Those three things are all predictors of lower civic engagement, and that really shows when we look at the civic behaviors. So this is a voting pattern of college and non-college youth historically, and you can see that there's always been quite a bit of gap between the two groups, and that doesn't seem to be shrinking at all. And actually the gap's worse when you look at the 30 and plus age group, suggesting that developmentally, when they're young, they're already less likely to participate, and that only gets worse as they age. And not only do they differ in terms of behavior, the underlying belief about voting seems to be different. The non-college youth are less likely to believe that it's important to vote, and that's really a huge problem, right? Then we also see statistically a huge gap in the terms of all the civic behaviors that I just showed you in an earlier slide by education. The college graduates are anywhere between 2 to 3 times more likely to do any of these things as people that have just high school degree. Volunteering, again, is also more common. It's sort of startling to see that actually if you don't have college experience at all, only 1 in 10 people volunteer at all a year, compared to about a quarter of young people who have gone to college. Again, we see a difference in underlying belief or efficacy about what they can do in the community. Non-college youth are less likely to believe that they can make a difference. And if you actually look at the civil leadership in the community, I want to point your attention to the rightmost graph here. Only 2% of young people with no college education take up any leadership position in the community, compared to 6% of people, young people that have gone to college. This to the right side is 30 and plus graph, and you can see the difference actually expands as they become older. So it's really important what they do in the young age, because it's only going to expand as they become older and the gap becomes deeper and deeper. So you can see that it's a challenge in some ways. Millennials is a positive, optimistic, bright, technologically savvy generation. At the same time, it really does come with the same challenge, but perhaps more so because it's more diverse than other generations have ever been. We can't just assume that everybody's like us, or everybody's like sort of the mainstream society, and everybody would be able to participate in the same way. So let's talk a little bit about the implications, and I hope there's going to be a lot of feedback from you guys, because I think you are the ones that have a lot more experience in that area. So how can you work with the millennial generations effectively? There are a few sort of suggestions and tips that are coming from research and both also from the youth engagement world. First, it's important to capitalize on the passion and their need for the meaning. The millennials are really known to want to have a purpose and meaning and contribute in that way. So it's important that the older generation and leaders create a space for expressing opinions by them, and also to recognize that they are more than somebody that knows how to use a computer or how to create a web page. They do know that they have a lot to say, and they are creative, and they want to contribute. So it's really important to go beyond just the technology side of the millennials. Some of the differences that have been highlighted in research are, once again, technology and their need to be individual and creative, their power of social networking, and also the need for fast and applicable feedback. And this is really a product of how they grew up, right? They grew up with the boomer parents and maybe Gen X parents who really were more egalitarian than traditional parents had been. They were allowed to have opinions, people listened to them, people gave choices. So they do expect somewhat similar things from their workplace, but also because they had parents that were really helping them through. You know, we use the term helicopter parents sometimes, and that's exactly that. They've given feedback to their kids, they've given guidance and mentorship throughout, and sometimes they still give their adult children their feedback. So again, they expect the same from whoever they work with. This is a graph or chart from the Harvard Business Review from this past year, a survey of millennials about what they wanted. And you can see some of the things that were highlighted in the research here, right? They want feedback, they want customizable options like individuality and creativity. They want to learn about creative strategies here, but they also want mentorship. It's also interesting that they want comfortable with, they want bosses that are comfortable with flexible schedules, and they want to customize their benefits and reward package. Those are some of the things that we didn't really ask our bosses earlier in our career, I think, so that's generational in some ways. And then how do we then nurture millennial civic leaders beyond just integrating them in the workplace? Remember, the millennials are passionate. They do community change, and they're used to and enjoy working with other people, and most of all, they really want to contribute. Meaning, they do want their opinions hard, even if they don't always go their way. So what's missing in our society or the civics culture of the country? One thing that could be missing in many places is a civic infrastructure. So we see that young people are always less engaged than older adults, but we've seen some exceptions here and there. Some exceptions are your neighbor Seattle, Twin Cities in Minnesota, and Hampton, Virginia. Those are the cities that have been studied, so I'm not saying it's, you know, those are the only cities. But these cities are known to sort of have a civic culture among citizens where a large portion of them believe that their contribution actually matters. And the city won't do as well without them working together and doing things to improve the community. And that often takes a really long time to build, but it has been done. The second thing is a space for youth voice and leadership. If you and other leaders sort of are able to let the millennials and other young people be creative and try something new, it could be a risky thing, but it does seem important that people sort of call on young people to say, you have a responsibility, we count on you, and you have something to contribute, then they're likely to respond. Third thing is consistent feedback and mentorship. They may not look or act like they need a lot of help, but the research repeatedly shows they want feedback, they want guidance, and it also shows that they're actually able to take critical feedback better than older generations have been able to, again, because they're accustomed to that. So they might react really well to that. Some of the application of these research tips and findings is that they might be less likely to stick to traditional workplace schedule and location. When we had an opening in Circle for a researcher position, we got a lot of applications from young people, and I was appalled to see how many people asked for remote working conditions. They lived in Atlanta, they lived in California, they didn't think it was a barrier at all. And I was personally surprised, but again, a different idea of working and how effective it can be remotely. They may also not feel that in-person meetings are essential for a similar reason. They might not feel like it's fast enough for the decision. And like I introduced some of the findings about the technology use, they might have a different ideas about the etiquette around using technology in formal settings, like meetings and checking messages and writing texts. They may want to place to express their unique opinion, even if the decision does not end up in their favor. They want to contribute. And this is more of a semantic than anything else, but they do appreciate the opportunity to collaborate rather than work for somebody. It would essentially be the same thing, but it's really about the mind, frame of mind, about how we work together, how we make decisions together, and they respond to that pretty well. They may appreciate the work that has clear meaning or purpose. It might be just a matter of communication about what they do is important, why it is important for the program or project or the organization that they work with. And finally, they may try to multitask too much. It's really sort of this desire to be so fast and immediate and efficient that sometimes compromises the quality of the work they do. And it's really something that the older generations can help them correct in some way. Slow down, it's okay to take 2 days to get this research done. It's, it's perfectly fine, and they'll probably respond to that well. So lastly, I just talked about how it's really hard to integrate non-college youth in civic life. So how do we do it? It's a really tough question because they really show not just lower levels of behavior, but lower efficacy in that they don't believe as a group in themselves to be able to do a lot in the community. So there are some examples of organizations and groups that have been able to do that. And some of the common things we see in them is really the idea of investment and persistence in them. It's really important that the groups and organizations and mentors believe in them, believe in their capacity to do more, and believe in their capacity to reach higher potential, and actually give them a responsibility. And even if it seems risky, stick with them. And that seems to be some of the active ingredients, so we say, of these youth organizations that have successfully integrated people that are young and often high school dropouts and even have criminal records or are homeless in some cases, and they have been able to do that. So with that, I'd like to take questions, or I think Javier and others are going to maybe have response.
Kei?
Yeah.
We're going to transition just a little bit so that Javier and Masai can ask you questions, and we've got you up on the screen. And we are going to also get set up for some questions from the audience. Our time now is about 10 after, and we do finish up right at 1:30, so if you can keep your responses somewhat short and to the point, that would be helpful as well.
Okay.
So we're going to take a few questions from our responders, Javier and Masai. Javier, would you like to start us out?
Hi.
Hi. So you discussed, first, great to see you. You discussed that the Generation Y, we're replacing the boomers in the workplace. Has there been any research about how the current recession has affected this, in that boomers may be staying on longer, delaying retirement, which might be, I guess, in a way pushing out the Generation Y new employees or keeping them out a little bit longer? Do you have any research on that?
Let me check. Was the audience able to hear the question? So the question again, is that on? Make sure it's on.
Hold it closer.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. Okay. So summarize.
Okay. How has the recession affected boomers staying in the workplace longer, putting off retirement, and Generation Y not being able to enter?
Go ahead, Kei.
Great question. And that's really sort of a lot in the media about that, how people have had to stay. And there's been some survey research that suggested that the boomers adjust their retirement plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't retire, but they may have changed the way they spend the money after they retired or got laid off. In terms of the actual data, though, when we look at the actual labor statistics, the recovery rate for young people aren't that different from that of older people. So that suggests that the young people are recovering at the same rate in terms of employment and regain as the older people. What we do know, though, is that there's a huge disparity among different racial groups. So it might be that the recovery itself is going okay, although the young people really did suffer, but it's not an equal recovery for everybody. And that might have to do with who's retiring and who's able to get into the workplace. So it's a little bit more complex story than that, I think.
Thank you. Masai?
How's it going? I too have a question regarding generational change in the workplace. What would our workplace look like with, let me rephrase this again. What will our workplace look like with intergenerational staffs? What benefits and challenges do you anticipate?
So what are the benefits and challenges of intergenerational workplaces? What are they going to look like?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it's both an asset and challenge, right? This is sort of the first time that we have probably 3 generations working together for one workplace. And depending on how the older and younger generation react to one another, it can be a chaotic place where one group of young people are saying, well, you older people are doing something really wrong. You're not being efficient enough. You're not doing the technology stuff fast enough. Whereas older people might say, you guys just want the speed and you're not taking the time to think about it. But this is part of the reason why I sort of talked about how do we work with them together. I think it's all about how do we do it. And probably the most important thing is flexibility on both sides, right? So the older generation who's taking the leadership role now, again, have to give in a little bit, even if the younger people might offend you by, reading a text during a meeting or saying something like, oh, can't we just do the meeting on Skype? Like we are now, right? But, you have to really try to understand where they're coming from. A lot of that sort of what we might consider rude behavior seems to be coming from their desire to actually be efficient so that they're not wasting time, moving from one place to another and next. But I do expect that the next generation of workplace would look different. I think a lot more people are going to work remotely, and I think the older generation, and Gen Xers especially, are going to be more and more okay with that. And we have to really think about what does that mean, especially when we do community work. Does that have a really huge negative impact? And then we have to really think together about that.
Thank you. We'll do one more question from Javier and Masai each, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. So Javier?
Hi. So what can members of Generation Y that are involved in civic engagement, what can they do to reach out to members of Gen Y that haven't gone to college that don't really seem to care? You mentioned some of those organizations. Are there any other examples you could provide?
So the question is, what can the millennials do within their own generation to help bridge that engagement divide between college educated and non-college educated?
Sure. There's actually been some attempts to actually do that. Like an organization called Generation Engage used to really try to engage both community college and non-college youth together. And some of that is really have to do with some of the larger initiatives that can happen in a city, for example. If, for example, a city creates an opportunity and actually invest in outreach effort to get the young people through different avenues, not just from college, which is a successful place, but religious organizations often have a lot of young people who are not going to college, but are attending their activities frequently and regularly. So by increasing the opportunities to collaborate between different kinds of institutions in the community, you can achieve that. Another place that I've seen that done successfully is the city of Hampton, where they actually nurture civic leadership in high school, and they bring in these people into the city government infrastructure very early on. They will use leadership that actually have an impact on the way the city government works and how the policy is formed. And that's not formed necessarily by just college youth. It's by other people as well. So that's another way that the community can achieve that.
Thank you. Masai, last question from our first questioners here, and then we'll turn it over to the audience.
Okay, my question also involves civic engagement. What are the barriers to accessing service opportunities or traditional civic engagement for particular populations, women and minorities?
So the question was, what are those barriers to civic engagement, perhaps especially for non-college educated youth? But Masai also asked about minorities and women. Are there any gender issues in civic engagement with this generation?
Sure. So the barriers actually depend a little bit on what sort of civic behaviors you're talking about. The voting behaviors actually blocked a lot by inflexibility in the schedule of a lot of non-college youth. A lot of them work full-time, have children. They do transition a little bit earlier into adulthood. So they may, have a hard time actually registering to vote. The registration rate is really terrible for non-college youth, for example. In terms of the volunteering and things like that, when Circle does a lot of focus group with young people who do not go to college, a lot of the stories we hear are about not just that there's a barrier, like they don't know about the opportunities in the community, but really it's more psychological. They don't feel that they can make any difference. And some of that may have to do with their experience growing up. A lot of them are more likely to grow up in communities where there are a lot more challenges like violence, crimes, single parenthood, a lot of poverty and discrimination. And they seem to feel that, whatever I do, nothing's going to change. And so there needs to be a bigger cultural change among those people and what we do with them and how we change, for example, educational system. And what's the second part? I'm sorry, women and minority, right? Yeah. So actually, women are more likely to do at least some service activities than men do. So there seems to be not a lot of barriers. They're also more likely to vote, actually. They're quite engaged. The minority folks, again, it does depend a little bit on what minority group and what sort of behavior. For example, Black youth are more likely to be civically engaged, at least in the political domain. They were the highest voting group among young people in the 2008 election and 2010 as well. But their volunteering and monetary donation rates a little bit lower. So again, that might be more practical. Like, do they have time? Do they believe in volunteering? And also we see that sometimes when we ask the question of service differently, these minority groups are a lot more engaged than we originally believed. Like, they help out the neighbors a lot more. So again, the research is not always up to date to the reality.
Thanks, Kei. We're going to transition to questions from the audience now. Are we set up and ready to do that? And the questions can be for Kei or for our other panelists, Javier and Masai, so feel free. Working with technology on our side here, Kei.
Okay.
Microphones. And our tradition here at City Club is that the first questions get to go to City Club members, and if we still have time, then we'll go to non-members.
Okay. First question.
Thank you.
Be careful there.
The data that you show us is real-time data. In effect, we're looking at these various generational cohorts as they are today. Have you been able to do any retrospective work to see how they were when they were at the same stage that the Ys or the X's are?
Were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, so you're asking whether they were like the generation millennials are when the Gen X are in the same age group and boomers are the same age group?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, some of the graphs that I included actually do show that. So the graphs generally show that when they're 15 to 30, what are they like? So the trend is that they are more likely than when older generations were young to be less religiously affiliated. They're more likely to volunteer. They are also more liberal than they were when older people were younger. So there are some of the differences here. But other things are generally the same in terms of trend. They were, the older generations were more distrustful of the institution. Oh, and another thing that I didn't cover is that actually older generations were more likely to have major disagreements with their parents when they were young compared to the generation now. So that's actually an interesting finding, that they seem to be more fond of their parents than we were when we were young.
You got a good laugh on that one. All right, so our next question is from a City Club board member.
Hello. This question is about where our educational institutions around the world have traditionally been the seat for political activism. What do you find now? Many countries in the universe, in the world have universities that are sort of the hotbed for new ideas coming and sometimes revolt against government. That happened certainly during the 60s and the early 70s. I'm wondering if that time is gone.
Yeah.
And Kei, this is Liz, just to let you know, we've only got a few minutes left, so if you could wrap it up in a minute or two here.
Sure. So we just saw that in London and also in Italy, right? So it's still happening internationally, but in the United States, we don't see sort of as large of a movement they did in the 60s. This is sort of more of a suggestion or guess than anything else, but we do know that in high school, the political activism is not encouraged, and the current discussion of the political events and current events are not even encouraged. And that's really sort of a negative thing when we think about nurturing this political activism and civic engagement for slightly older groups like college students. So that could be why we're seeing some shift there.
Thank you so much, Kei. And
one more, please.
We've got one more question.
We seem to be concerned with the non-college students. How about the non-high school students? That seems to me more important because the non-college ones perhaps can go to tech school or do that thing, but the non-high school graduates are a big proportion.
Yeah. Again, it's a sort of epidemic problem in the United States, and their engagement level, we saw in at least one of the graphs that it's even worse than those who have at least high school degree. Again, for example, YouthBuild USA is sort of a very well-known program that combines workforce development and high school degree, and that's a successful program that takes in high school dropouts and are able to engage them both into community life and civic engagement. But that takes a lot of resources. You have to remember what sort of background and upbringing that they bring in when they are sort of so-called high school dropouts. And it does take a lot more resource and creativity on our part.
Kei, we're going to wrap things up.
Okay.
We're going to wrap things up. Before we do, we'd like to show you to the audience to see who's here, and so we can say thank you. Okay? So I'm going to turn around the computer. So we want to thank you, Kei, and we also want to thank Masai and Javier. We have a tradition here at City Club where we give our speakers a special gift, and Kei, yours will go in the mail. It's a book called Whatcom Places To. Oh, she's off. She's off. Good timing. But these are for you then. Masai and Javier, thank you so much for your help putting together this program. Thank you. And thank you all for your flexibility and your willingness to experiment with us as we move into new technology. So thank you all for being here today.